Thanks for coming. We will be talking a lot about the US and Europe and how best practices to pitch in an untapped market, or perhaps you already have tapped in some of these markets. We split the presentation in three parts. Just make sure we have a lot of checklists and tips on how to best target any strategy for any market to help you kickstart your journey, and then some Q&A. So treating, obviously, just to kickstart our conversation, it will be more about, we'll talk about international PR, and it's going to be a no-brainer to say that we have seen a lot of international PR, practices around, the past few years in the UK, but not just in the UK, internationally, treating US and Europe just about, it's about spelling and send times, but it's not just that. In general, digital PR has changed a lot. Even if you're just tapping into it today, or you have been working in digital PR for a long while, you will know and you will agree that with all the Google updates and algorithms, it has changed a lot. It's all about relevancy. We went from these type of campaigns that some people will obviously have seen before, the listicles, the dream jobs, the best cities for X, to more all-round campaigns, like connected campaigns that work harder for you, not just by attracting media attention online publications, but also attracting social media attention, and also having perhaps from billboards taking over out-of-home practices, like taking over gyms, as you can see here. And these are some examples from key brands. I think they're known worldwide, that you might have seen, might not, but they are quite more on the creative side, which is something we are focusing on in PR 2026. But also the types of campaigns in digital PR has changed a lot. A great example is, obviously, this is part of the digital PR report that BuzzStream does every year. We went again from your listicles, best cities for X, best countries for X, to more data-led things, and maybe expert commentary, including case studies. The way we pitch to journalists have changed a lot, and the formats that actually bring links has changed dramatically. And also the industries that used to be easier to get links now can be more difficult. Again, this is part of a study. You can see industries like education, fashion, tech, these have all been proven a bit more harder to land links with.
Yeah, so what's the big difference sort of between the US and Europe? I think we treat Europe as one big market, but if you think about it, there's 24 official languages across Europe, and 7 different time zones. So it's a continent. It's not just a market. And a common misconception that people have is, I'll just translate my release with some like EU destinations. It's got Spain on there. It's fine. They'll do the trick. But in reality, to achieve successful multi-market application, we've got to translate culture, not just language. We've got a whole lot of blogs on our website that sort of talk about different markets. We've got Spain, Italy, France, etc., that you can have a look at. But I thought it would be good to show you essentially what it means to know your market. So if you put France, for example, in ChatGPT, you're like, oh, get me the 13 regions of France. It'll just come up with these. But if you know sort of the history, there's been, I think 10 years ago, we've gone from 22 regions to 13 regions. Merging those regions doesn't mean that the people merge their culture with the region next to them. So someone from the rural Limousin, which is, I call the outback of France, there's nothing going on there. It doesn't share much with someone from Basque Country, which have a completely different culture, sort of like languages, and they've just been put in the same sort of pot. So if you outreach to those people, you need that difference. And if you look at France as well, on a department level, there's 101 administrative departments. They all have their foods, they all have their culture, they all have their sort of special days. So it's one that's worth considering. So what's the European landscape like? It's shaped by regions, fragmented media. We see in a lot of, especially the Latin countries, that the regional outlets are more prominent than the nationals. And that's where you need that native content to not only have cultural relevance, but also keyword relevance. Because at the end of the day, we're building links for our clients to just get better rankings. So we need that keyword relevancy. The lead times are slow, which we'll touch on a bit later. And there's also way more scrutiny. They need to check where that data comes from. Why are you sending me this, essentially? Where did you get that info? Yeah, that's what they need. So I guess sort of an actual insight for how to have success in Europe rather, is to understand your market first. So what's the media landscape like? What are the cultural differences between sort of regions? Um, then when it comes to crafting your campaign, you want to prioritize data led because that's what works at the moment. But you have to make sure that you've got that local data essentially to get all your angles. But local is not enough. You also need regional trades if you're looking at sort of industry splits. So it's really important to just really target the people that you want to outreach your campaign to. And then you have to localize. So you're not tailoring to a country, you're tailoring to a city. So one thing we found was that using sort of previous press coverage for sort of headlines to see how you can angle it works quite well. And yeah, you need to include details of how is this study relevant to my little town of 20,000 people. And finally, you have to prepare your support and evidence. So it's crucial that you have a blog or landing page because the journalist will ask for it to sort of fact check it. And then you can always upload it on Google Sheets or on Flourish if you want them to have a look by themselves. But yeah, be prepared to have to defend your campaign essentially.
And yeah, so market differences in the US. I think it does go without saying that winning digital PR in the US is definitely not a one size fits all approach. And I think one of the most important places to start is really just reiterating that US success means thinking in terms of 50 different markets, just exactly like what Mark was saying for France, each with its own behaviors, values, news priorities that must be embedded into everything you do from a PR perspective. It's so easy to kind of fall into that trap of treating the US as one single market, outreach and stuff in Michigan, thinking that it'll, resonate the same in Arizona. It won't. And, these differences can also be seen on a much more granular level, even state by state too. But I think the real golden rule here is to just hammer home that relevancy drives coverage, coverage drives links and results for your campaigns, for your clients. And the more locally and culturally relevant you can make your campaigns, then your chances of success really do increase. And I think the first step that I really want to touch on for everyone today is just kind of hammering home the importance of nuance in digital PR and realizing that it's so much more than a nice to have. And it's genuinely what determines whether a campaign will feel relevant enough to be picked up in the first place. So, here are my top 3 tips on how to make sure you hit that nuance mark in US digital PR. Number one, at ideation stage, the genesis of your idea needs to be essentially rooted in clear understanding of local context that surrounds it. For example, are there any local laws or political narratives that would directly influence how your campaign's narrative could be received or picked up? And secondly, data sets are great, they're amazing, and we sure do need them to really cut through the very vast landscape that is the US media. But if they do not reflect real lived community experiences, and unfortunately it just won't work. And the data sets that we do pitch need to kind of speak directly to a current issue. And finally, this kind of, weave into current conversations notion goes, for all markets, but especially in the US, audiences and journalists are so smart. And no matter how shiny your release or email pitch is, if the content feels disconnected from what's already being spoken about or is about to be spoken about, then it just won't work. Um, and I just really want to show you guys really, really quickly kind of what understanding nuance can really deliver in the US. Our previous B2C dental client operated across a really diverse range of US communities across Arizona, Colorado, Nevada, Texas. They had very minimal digital PR presence. And essentially, over 12 months, we were able to create a media trust loop, building them up as the, you know, credible dental authoritative figure in the US. And we kind of put the success onto 3 things. When building out their strategy, we really got to know the client, the patients, the dentists, which really kind of enabled us to recognize in all of our campaigns and all of our digital PR work, we realized that it didn't matter what was relevant to what one patient was saying in one area versus another, even though we're all talking about the same topic, which is teeth and oral health, it didn't necessarily always translate. So then knowing this, we made sure that every single campaign was backed by social listening data to most accurately reflect what individual communities were talking about in terms of dental topics. And then where we could to kind of bolster that, we made sure that we were able to layer our standard run-of-the-mill data collection or survey data campaigns with the client's internal data too, to kind of really, make sure we stand out every single time when we land a pitch in a journalist's inbox. And if we did all these things, then that's what got us the really good results. But what you'll find is Nuance isn't exclusive to B2C clients. And I think, in my opinion, it's actually more important in the B2B spaces where, they're very heavily driven by editorial and economic agendas, and understanding that nuance. We were able to be really successful in the US with a B2B client. So if you have a client in this space or in the finance space, you have a brand, this four-tiered pyramid lays out the approach we recommend for the highest chance of success in the B2B space. Yeah, perfect. So at the bottom sits expert opinion. So what we find helps build genuine credibility amongst US editors is that inclusion of strong internal and external expert commentary that goes more than just presenting a data set. It goes further. It explains why that data matters, because having a large data set is amazing. Yeah, fair. But it really essentially means nothing to a journalist if you can't provide opinion on it, you don't sit on the fence. Um, and the next, existing conversations and aligning with those. US business publications are built around making it feel like a natural contribution to these publications. They talk about the same things. And, we were able to recognize that. And we were ending up actually being able to be published on a Texas government site because we were aware of tapping into the existing conversations and not really reinventing the wheel. And arguably, what I think is the most important one on this pyramid is commercial relevance. Editorial decisions are driven by commercial audience behaviors, meaning stories are judged by how well they will fit wider narratives around money, growth. So it makes sense why an outlet like, say, for example, Fox Business would want to cover a story that presents a much more stronger business picture, which is what we found for our specific client. And at the very top, cherry on the top, is having that awareness of making sure you're landing editorially, timing it correctly. Common sense goes a really long way here. And if you are paying attention to market dates, economic calendar, the business calendar, and you're ahead of those, then editors will be primed to kind of cover your story. And I think, to kind of sum everything up of what I've been saying, for anyone who wants to start doing digital PR in the US, or if you're a brand and you want to start tapping into it this year, I think this is what's based on what's currently working across our clients across a range of different sectors. And just to note, we know that the landscape is super dynamic, but time and time again, we do see following these 4 steps, it stands the test of time. I think the most important thing I want to kind of drill in is success will never come from just having a really strong data set or a really shiny press release. It comes from, first of all, studying where your audience are consuming the news. Getting a really high DA link on a publication or site where your audience doesn't read or doesn't care about, essentially, to be brutal, means nothing. Researching your publication's tone of voice too. Does it feel natural when it lands in that journalist inbox is something that publication covers time and time again? And also reading the cultural room when it comes to topics, as well as, just as Marc was saying earlier, localizing at every single touch point from your data sets to your email pitches. And we do believe that if you do get a mixture of all these things right, then your chance of success in the US is pretty much increased. And just really, really quickly, wanted to kind of leave everyone with a bit of food for thought. This is a piece of feedback I received from a US journalist who was freelance a few months ago during the time where the news cycle was really, really heavy in the US, a lot of political uncertainty, and everything was just kind of going crazy. And we received this and we kind of made the wider team reflect on the kind of growing appetite of newsrooms and individual journalists to kind of provide them with more positive, solution-led stories that kind of offer that relief from heavy news cycles. So if I were to give my top tip to anyone today that you can actually implement right away, is maybe think before you push out your next angle in the US. Reflect, is there a way that you could potentially make it a bit more positive?
So now let's say you have obviously focused on one specific market, you've understood the cultural nuances there, you've built a bit of a confidence on obviously understanding what you want to push in those markets. But how do you actually find the best people to reach out? let's cover the basics first. And I do like this movie, so you might see more gifts from this. I know there's a great webinar that Vince ran on how to search effectively on Google, specifically if you're looking for journalist emails. And that can be the first step here. We have here a bit of various tools that you can use. But the first thing I would say is lean on Google. Don't be afraid to search in a not language you're not known. Obviously, you don't know, you don't speak, and there's plenty of ways to go about it. And these are namely some tools, types of searches you can do on Google. The example here is if you were to search for Greek media, if you had a piece of content around with the World Cup, you can find publications, hence, then you can find the journalist's email from those publications that will be relevant to your story. But going on that, I will just pass it on to another tool that we use.
Yeah, we like DuckDuckGo. DuckDuckGo is good. So it's actually a tip that's coming from one of our PRs there. Doesn't speak a European language, but has been able to earn coverage in those markets without knowing the language, is to just use that DuckDuckGo, because essentially on the headline you can change the country you're looking for. So obviously you're doing Boolean searches with localized keywords, but when you go into Google you can change the language and the region of Google. But it's a bit fiddly. I have mine in French. When I need to search something for the US, it's terrible. Whereas DuckDuckGo, you can just change it really easily. And I think that helps get the best results, because your UK or US Google is not going to show relevant results in Italy, in Spain, for example. So yeah, a good tool to use.
So let's say this is a more of a publication specific example, but if you were to use Google to start with, even if you just sourcing names publications to understand what's the equivalent of Guardian in Spain. For example, as you can see from the screenshots here, using advanced search, you'll change your region to Spain, change the language of your search to Spanish, and then you would obviously choose, let's say, World Cup, which is the topic you focus on, to find publications. And you can see here we have, as an example, the equivalent of Guardian. I think it's pronounced El País. Don't quote me. So you can then start your journey on finding what's the most relevant publication for my story, and then going through, obviously, journalists' emails. Another way you can find, obviously, the best people to outreach is track media link activity. This is based on a paid tool called Muckrack, mostly used as a content database, but you can actually use, there are different tools that they have internally on tracking different domains to specific countries to find journalists or outlets that talk about this specific topic, and they have linked back to them websites more often, and then you can export this data from Muckrack or the equivalent of Muckrack, and then you can find the best publication for you, for your topic. But also AI, we couldn't not just mention AI because it's part of life. I wouldn't use AI tool to create a media list by itself, but it's nice to use effectively. So think smart, not hard. And BuzzSumo, it will be step one. I'm sure most people here might know it. If they don't, it is another tool that it helps you track links and analyze topics, but they have a really nice feature called Backlink Analyzer, where you can input, for example, any travel topic. Let's say you have a travel story for like a cruise client, and then you can export the results from BuzzSumo to see backlinks linking back to the specific topics for a specific country, and then upload this list of backlinks to ChatGPT. Ask it to analyze the link topics, and then you can find how many people, obviously from this publication, have linked back to those publications for the specific topic, when over time they were obviously covering this specific topic, so you can time your pitch perfectly. And then finding the exact email from this journalist, you can just copy and paste there, go on their Twitter page. Most of the people have that there in their bio, or you can even go into their publication and find the format of the email and try to find the perfect email for each journalist. But also List IQ is something that I know whoever hasn't used it before, it's worth a try. We do use it internally. We use BuzzStream primarily for our outreach purposes internally, but List IQ is a good tool to cut back time on having all these steps that I mentioned before, on doing a manual check to find publications relevant to your topic or from different markets and journalist emails. So if you had the Chrome extension, we have inputted here an example, a German specific piece, and you want to find German journalists. Let's say it's about divorce rates or couples, and you would go on DeepL. This is the only one internally that we would lean on to more as a free tool to translate most close enough. I wouldn't say it's perfect, but it's definitely good for that specific purpose. So you would check the specific word, you would get it on Google search, and then you would have the Chrome extension, as you can see here on the right, and you would choose the most relevant publications for your topic. You would click add to your media list, and then you would, let's say you have 10 articles here, input it into your media list. Make sure you choose, apart from the URL, the article, author, and email, you make sure you click the social media thingy as well, so you can have the journalist's LinkedIn's. And that's one way we have found that it works best to cross-reference how real and accurate the information is for these journalists. I know journalists in general, they like to switch publications, maybe they go freelance, and it's not that, their role might not be even the same as it was last year. So check in with the LinkedIn, see if they moved recently, of if the recent coverage that they have covered in an article is not of the same topic that your press release is focused on. Make sure you go through spend more time here so you can make sure your tailored media list is up to par, because that will make or break your campaign for sure. And then obviously a little checklist here for you to take back. And let's say you start in an ad top market and you're looking at building a tailored media list. This is a good start, apart from the tips that we just mentioned. Let's say you do have your obviously tailored media list. You do have chosen the best market for that you want to focus on, and you understood the cultural nuances. How would you actually build your perfect pitch?
Yep. So anyone who works on accounts with me will know that I always harp on about this one phrase: a great story, poorly pitched, doesn't get seen. And I think this does deserve its own slide, because it's just really important to note that even, you may have the strongest campaign idea, the strongest data set, but it won't land if it doesn't get cut through in the inbox. And just to be just really transparent, it's not something I want people to get paranoid or super worried about, but there are a few things you can do to really kind of pull out all the stops to make sure your email does stand out in a journalist's inbox. So we know that journalists are so time poor and they're incredibly stretched, and we as PRs don't want to, add more to their plates. So we must work on the assumption that they will only read our subject lines. Okay, then what do you do from there? So tip number one is, because they are our first point of contact with the journalists, lead with buzzwords to make sure that it's instantly signaled to a journalist the value of your pitch. And a really great study from BuzzStream, they analysed kind of common phrases that were used in terms of open rates. And it's really, really interesting to see just how different and kind of variant it is to kind of, whether you use tip, revealed, case study research. So our biggest tip is to make sure you do use buzzwords to instantly stand out. And as well, some other little tips to really capture that 5-second attention span, that, no matter what the market, Italy, Spain, US, Germany, we find that if we follow these three kind of self-reflection questions, and your chances of getting that open can really increase. Number one, to help newsrooms and journalists out, as I've said, they're really, really time poor. And number one rule I stick by is, if I can't summarize the angle in a short sentence, then a journalist will not be able to do that for me. So just make sure that you can briefly summarize the main angle you want to get across in a nice little short phrase to put it into your subject line. Think in headlines, essentially, from ideation stage right the way through. Number two, does your subject line match or sound like the publication's tone of voice? This is where AI or your favorite LLM model can really kind of help you with this, because you can quickly put in a little prompt of, give me 10 most recent headlines that this publication has covered. And if it doesn't match that, then you'll need to go back and kind of do your homework and kind of cross-reference and cross-check. And number three is, in my opinion, the most important one: have you front-loaded the data or stat? Because there's no point having a really strong survey stat or an indexed statistic revealed that if you've got it hidden in a press release. Make sure it's front-loaded at the start. And, the proof is in the pudding. At C3, we always find, not always, but most of the time, journalists literally will copy and paste the subject lines that we outreach. The top one there is the campaign I was outreaching for our lifestyle client. And it literally did get lifted and uploaded onto a North Carolina news site. And as well, one of our iGaming team members for the NFL draft repeatedly finds that the journalist loves to literally just copy and paste. And I think this just tells us everything, that the story is clear, it's relevant, and it's just ready to use for that journalist.
So yeah, touching on the perfect pitch. Let's say you've written it perfectly. You have the perfect subject line. Yes, it's all data led and relevant to the journalists you have included in your media list. But how would you make it relevant locally? How would you make sure your pitch works harder for you? And this is one of my favorite things to quote on. I'm not sure if anyone here remembers a really, really old ad, but you wouldn't say and you wouldn't spell favorite like that in a US pitch. So why would you pitch Spain in a Spanish publication or EU wide data set that won't include Spanish data, or a Cypriot data set to Greek media just because they speak the same language? There are so many different cultural nuances that you need to take into consideration before you even click send. So we do have three key markets that we've seen the most differences on. And obviously we have included it here because I know we say Europe, but most of the times we would think Italy, France, Germany, like those obviously big economical markets. So the perfect pitch, as an example here, how would it work? The same data set for for those three countries. We had obviously a travel client, travel pitch around cycling, and it did get pick up. The same data set got picked up three different ways in those three markets. So for the US, obviously it was around school holidays, and the time was perfect for them to get for picking up the family friendly angle and which are the best family friendly cycle destinations in the US. So it was more fluffy countrywide data. It got picked up some regionals in radio stations, but the major outtake from that was a bit more on the positive side, without getting into the nitty gritty of the remaining data set that we had on obviously the city's infrastructure and things like that. Whereas in Spain, for example, in France, for example, we had more of a city pride angle performing better. So we pitched it and we localized it by city for different cities like Paris and Bordeaux, but it got picked up more onto with the hook on best friend cities for cycling. This is obviously something that they're proud for. And in Italy, the core idea was the same, but the pitch was different because we saw that a lot of people were more into the fitness in those areas that we included their data set and also the infrastructure there. It was a more obviously better for some cities when it comes to the roads and the cycling routes. So the local city angle that got picked up was Bologna was the best city for amateur sport, but also there was a sport angle that picked up from some major publications, the best cities for cycling and running. So in all, if we were to pitch the family-friendly angle in Italy, it wouldn't work, mostly because it wasn't timed well. There was no school holidays when we pitched it, and also it wouldn't resonate on the cities that don't really have good infrastructure for the roads and cyclists. They're not known for amateurs traveling there to actually go through the cycling routes in the area.
Yeah, and when we think pitching, we often think B2B and B2C. So the sort of key takeaways that we found for B2C in sort of the US versus Europe is that in the US, lead times can be longer, and that's something you need to take into account in your roadmap. You need that outreach time to be longer. Um, and yeah, just to make sure that you're not shooting yourself in the foot, essentially. And you need to take into account time zones. So we've got more insights on that later. In Europe, local angles work best, like we've said before. And another key takeaway is that lifestyle sort of B2C consumer-led studies need to be positive. If you're pitching finance, then you can be a bit more critical because frankly, nothing is going well financially wise in the world. But lifestyle needs to be positive. We don't have tabloids in Europe, or they're less prominent, and therefore there's that need for sort of positive news. And when we go into B2B, expert commentary becomes critical in the US. We see embargoes as well being important of sort of giving the data before with those insights so that we can pitch it and get the coverage. And in Europe, I think the most important is that you will get journalists to question your data. They will literally ring you and ask, can you tell me more about this data set? How was it? How was the data compiled? How many people did you survey? What was the splits of gender, city, um, industries? So yeah, you need to be prepared essentially to share way more information that you would for a lifestyle piece, essentially. And essentially, how does it look when in practice is that for B2B outreach, we used nationals as catalyst in France. So we chose a topic from a client's RPI report. It was a 90-page report. But like, right, which one would work in the French media landscape? So we aligned it to the media trends, to maximize sort of the national traction, and then we leveraged our contacts in these nationals to help strengthen that credibility of the campaign. If you see a study on The Guardian or El País or a big media in another country in Europe, you're more likely to trust it. And that's exactly how it worked, to the point where we had the actual brands in the ranking making LinkedIn posts about being elected the best company. We've had Decathlon do a whole sort of page about it as well. And in the articles, people are mentioning our client, this ranking for this big publication, essentially. So that's the way it works. And for B2C outreach, local insights for local press. So the cycling study that we did in Spain and Italy was to look at national holidays and do data-led campaign, essentially with specific angles that are crafted for local outreach. They're not just crafted for, right, we're going to send it in Italy, we're going to send it to Bologna, to Milan. And you can see in the subject line for Malaga that it includes data that is specific to this city within the headline, which sort of shows
Mhm.
what we've done it.
So I appreciate this all information to take in. So we quite compartmentalized a bit of insights and links on how to make your pitch newsworthy and how to get a head start on when's best to pitch your story per different markets. So for the US, there's obviously the overall known thing. There's different time zones, weather, and it does make sense that you will take into consideration, regardless of your topic that you're focusing on or the industry you're focusing on, all of these variables. You need to act like a local and think like a local, and it's really hard to keep track of everything. So these are a good starting point. So obviously federal holidays, there are obviously across the US, but each state has their own specific holidays that they have that different to other states, even the types of local authorities, and even there are different weather events that they're known for, like hurricane season, tornado awareness, and extreme heat periods of time. So it's best to create a bit of a plan on what's your key territories in the US, treat them as a different country, as Chloe said. What we tend to do internally is we have Google alerts on even different topics that we're focusing on for different clients or industries, and that we know that whenever something is picked up in the news, we can be the first ones to react on it. It could be anything from sports, like NFL, or it could be anything about consumer impact. If there's a new report around cost, safety, health, family, anything that would make sense for locals to think about if they are scrolling on their phones and they stop and read about it because they are born in X state or they live in X city, you would have to be an expert. And it's hard to be a local on every single state and act like a local for so different markets, but this is a good starting point. The same goes for Europe as well. But also, we don't really try. I know US, you can treat it as one market. You can pitch a general news story that is US wide, but I wouldn't do that for Europe. It's not something we've seen that works. So you need to get a bit more nitty gritty with your research. These are some good starting point data sources on how you would start your journey. Yes, there are obviously many links out there for different countries that are more in depth, that there are obviously in different languages. So if you don't know any of these languages, it's best to start your journey here. Let's say awareness days or even time zones. I know Marc mentioned there's 24 different languages in Europe, and it's better to get a head start on what's my focus market, and then understand how this country is divided, perhaps when it comes to like from the government perspective or from a cultural perspective. They even have different dialects. What's the religion, the main religion there? What are the public holidays in this country? For example, Easter is different for different countries. It's celebrated differently in different countries in Europe. And also, we have different name days and things like that. The different countries have bank holidays. For example, tomorrow in Europe, FYI, is bank holiday, but it's not on Monday, which is in the UK. So something to think about. And last one specifically for Europe is about editorial habits. And I know we have the expertise internally to, make this statement, but it's really different how culturally different to the UK or US media. How such a smaller, obviously geographically region has such a plethora of differentiations of editorial guidelines and editorial habits. So let's say you would never pitch a story on a Friday in the UK or the US. Maybe regardless if it's like newsjacking, if you're jumping on something that's right now happening in the news, you would definitely wouldn't do that in the UK media. But we've seen a lot of different countries, especially, for example, Greece and other countries known to have like smaller media landscapes, but they're really big and hungry for news. They would react really positively on the pitch on any given time, especially if it's tailored to them. The pitch is about their region or specifically the topic that they focus on. They don't really have that I'm pitching to my editor at 10 a.m. type of rule. So there's so many differences there. There's some examples here sourced that you can take back, but I would definitely pay attention to when they publish their articles in the main news publications in each country, in other country I'm focusing on, just to understand when's best for me to pitch and the best practices. Another top tip, we love our tips. What we have seen that works best, especially if you're outreaching and a story in an untapped market, especially if they've not really used to the journalists there getting emails from PRs, helping them with the story tailored to them, and to be honest, writing the article for them. What we do internally that has worked, just to cut back the back and forth with journalists, explaining what's digital PR, explaining why we're reaching out, is we do include in our pitch a specific like sentence. You can tailor that to however you want on. We are sharing this because we are representing X brand and it's free to use. It's editorially, tailored for your publication. If you need more information, free to reach out. And we also have, and I have done this more so for all my pitches, make it more of a human pitch and include my LinkedIn as a hyperlink at the bottom. Yes, you can add your phone number, but I wouldn't do that if you're sending that to many countries that you don't know the language for, because they might ring you and you won't be able to reply. But it's something that will make your pitch more human, and it does cut back time on going back and forth with them and actually educating them on what's digital PR. But obviously, the million-dollar question: when is best to send a pitch, and putting obviously data behind it. We have analyzed a lot of data from the past 4 years, and internally we have been pitching US stories for a long time, regardless of the industry here. But you can see a little bit of an overview of an analysis of our bus stream data based on our projects that we have for different clients, but for each state. And for example, as you can see here, we have obviously, apart from different time zones, we have concluded what's the percentage success rate for each of the states where you're most likely to get your email open based on open rates from different projects for each state. So, for example, journalists in Nevada here, you can see they're more active between 6 and 7 a.m. So they're most likely to open your email then. And they're up to 63% open rate at that period of time. But in North Carolina, the peak engagement, it happened mid-morning with the around highest 54% around 11 a.m. midday, which is quite uncommon, especially if you're a journalist. You might pitch earlier to your editor. But again, another tool we want to give you is if you already are outreaching and you have gotten coverage in a publication that might seem all Greek to you, and it might be from a country you don't know the language from, obviously that could be most likely European markets, we have a list of templates that you copy and paste on chasing for a link. So we call them follow-up templates. You can call them whatever you want, but they're all hyperlinked here, which you can take back and check how to use them. There are some specific instructions there where you can input your own, link to any domain you want to chase for a link for. Most likely, if this publication is not used to get pitches from PRs, they are most likely to add a link. So we want to give that to you to use. But yeah, if you have any more questions or if you need help since checking your European pitch, we are here. I know I've hyperlinked our LinkedIn's here. I'm pretty proud of that. I don't know how to do that. And I know Vince mentioned that as well, that everyone here gets some credits from ListIQ. Unless you don't think it's something you would do, Vince.
Nope, the deal still stands, everybody.
Because it's too late now.
That's right.
Should I?
Yeah.
Stop?
Yeah, we had a couple questions, I think, that were just sent through. I mean, honestly, I feel like you got through most of the things that were covered, but I think it was, more specific to a couple regions, which, I mean, I can let you answer them. I feel like, to be honest, like one of the benefits of this is like, I might be able to just connect you directly to some of these people, but if there's any specifically that you wanted to address, I know one of them was about outreach in Italy.
Yeah.
Specifically, if you guys had any specific thoughts about that, you can talk there. And then I had a couple questions as well.
Yeah. So the formula for a successful story in Italy, I read this question. It's quite interesting because Italy has been one of those markets that it's harder to crack in Europe. Not to say no, to be fair, Greece, I'd say it's easy. They're really hungry for information, and especially if it's tailored to them. But for Italy, what we've seen previously with obviously our exposure to it, I'm not native, but we have worked with a lot of natives in the market. I would say they are really data led. They do like their data, and they do like to have exclusives, and they do enjoy having, perhaps the leverage is quite competitive and in the media landscape there, but it's also quite smaller than other like big European markets like France and Spain, that there's not a lot of journalists hunger when it comes to stories and the listicles and your data led like countrywide city comparison stories. So I would say I would spend time before formulating my strategy for Italy, I would just spend time to create journalist relationship. It could make or break your campaign regardless of the territory. But in order to be successful in Italy, I would make sure to spend the time to create perhaps the perfect opening pitch, outreach to the journalists that will be tailored to the industry I'm focusing on, and ask them, what do I need to do to make sure I get featured in your publication? What's your editorial guidelines? And make sure you spend the time one-on-one with them, even jump on a call with them. Ideally, you know the language. But even if you don't, like actually try to be their like right hand to help them formulate any story. Like they're really keen on exclusivity.
Yeah, I would say it goes back to what we said at the start. Get to know your market. Where would you like to outreach your study? Do these cities have a lot of publication? Sometimes, it's not the biggest cities that have the most media in. So you've got to think from a link perspective as well. Where are you going to want to target? So get to know the region, make sure it's localized, and then, have your city angles ready. And if you need any more help, send us a LinkedIn message.
I had another question about personalization. Like, I know maybe in general, if get your thoughts on just the kind of like tailored intro where it's like, hey, I saw you wrote X article and therefore you might be interested in this. Baseline, how do each of you feel about that approach? Do you use it? Is it effective?
I would say we might all have different answers to it. I'm not going to speak with Chloe, but she might be the best person to talk about this because for me, she's like one of the best to do this effectively. When I do it, and I started my PR journey in obviously outreaching in the UK for UK journalists, and it was something I tried, but it didn't. Everyone has their own I think, style. It didn't read well for me. It didn't help me land anything. Mainly because it felt forced, but I think it's best to do it where your chances are like you can see this journalist is most likely to cover PR stories, and that comes with time. Like I wouldn't pitch a story to a national publication, a journalist from a national publication saying, I saw you cover X, because this person might be covering so many different beats, and it might not even occur to them that like doesn't even move the needle for him if or her, like that I read one of their stories. But if it's something really niche and even the market that is maybe is untapped, I would potentially do it. But it's not really my style. I think for Chloe, I don't want to speak about you, but I think it's better coming for someone who actually uses it.
Yeah, no, I think, historically when I first started a PR, I was obsessed with making sure I personalized every single email. But then upon reflection, as you said, Irene, it can come across as quite fake and forced. And journalists are so attuned to us these days. Digital PR is not a new thing, so they can easily catch on. But what I think I find most beneficial is, as Irene said, picking out, say, for example, if you've got a media list of, say, 30 really strong contacts, I would say for maybe at least 3 or 5 of those, if that journalist has covered something so similar and it still exists it was published in the last 6 or 12 months, I would reach out and say, hey, I've noticed you covered this. I actually have an updated angle or an updated data set that I think your piece is missing. So that way you're kind of like shoehorning yourself in much more naturally instead of just popping up out of the blue and saying, hey, how are you? I've noticed you had published this, cover my thing instead. It just makes it feel a bit more organic and not you're kind of imposing yourself on a journalist. But I think personalization doesn't always mean, saying that classic opening line of like, hey,
Right.
notice you wrote this, have mine. It can also mean, journalists can just be so grateful that you've even pitched them that reflects their beat that they cover. I think one of the quotes from an Axios journalist that we got recently was, he's just grateful that he gets sent a relevant pitch these days. So I think personalization, it can kind of go two ways, I think, if that answers your question, Vince. I hope so.
Yeah, I mean, my kind of follow-up question was going to be if you noticed it more or less effective in any other countries. Was it like when we do it in France, we always do it, or whatever?
I think again in Europe it depends who you're pitching it to and what you're pitching. Um, for example, I can take France as an example. They use a lot of interns in those sort of big regional publications. So it's not going to be the same person covering a story. So there's no point doing it if it's a newsroom or you're targeting an intern or like a fairly junior journalist that is going to move places. Sort of like a long-standing relationship. So that person is the head of their department of editorial. Then yeah, you're going to want to make sure that you show that you'll have an interest in their journal and what they read. And then it depends on what you're pitching as well. If it's a new piece of study, then not so much. But if it's something that relates directly to an article they've written 2-3 days ago, maybe a week before, and you've got data that adds to that article, then I would 100% just, put it in there. I've read your article about this. I've got this data that supports your data, like your article, or that is different, that offers another perspective on the article you've read. It shows that you've read their work, that you've got either contrast or something sort of adding to their claim, and it just fits into that whole credibility and getting your client to be a thought leader in that sort of space.
I might be putting myself out there here, but I know I just said I wouldn't personalize my pitch like that. But what I do, and again, it might sound stocky to some people, but doing your research, especially if you're doing a lot of outreach in untapped markets or even niche topics. Let's say, like I like football, but I'm not a football fan. But I had a pitch for some European football teams, and I was trying to get really relevant coverage and really relevant publications. That's hard to get because they have their own, editorial guidelines, and they have their own internal experts that they write their own opinion pieces. So they don't need PR. So I had a pitch about football stadiums in that specific region. So what I did, I found obviously the best journalist for that specific publication for my topic, and I knew it's relevant to them. But I did go on the LinkedIn page. Was it Twitter? I don't remember. I did win one of the social media profiles that were public, and they were really vocal about their favorite football team. So what I did, my pitch was tailored to their favorite football team. So I did get coverage. I didn't get a link because it was part of no linking policy in their publication, but I got a reply. I got into their obviously inbox, and they did say, send me anything relevant you have, because obviously the pitch was relevant. That did help. But obviously to grab their attention, I did do my research on a more personal side. That actually my pitch will be a general one. These are the best football stadiums for X, but that was more tailored to your favorite team, which was not part of something he was writing just for this team solely. So I would, if you have something niche, I would potentially suggest. I don't want people to stalk people, but I would suggest to do your research a bit more, because they are people. Like they do have their own agendas. They do have their own like preferences, even on subject lines, but even as people, they have their hobbies. So what if you were to pitch something?
Bias.
Yeah, you could be biased as a journalist on what email you open first, because you saw something that resonates with you, but doesn't mean you're going to cover it, but at least you're going to grab their attention. So I would definitely enhance.
Yeah. Fantastic. The other question, and people, we're getting up on time here, so feel free to jump off. But I had another question around case studies. So I know this is a thing that I've heard more and more from journalists. They really like when PR people are not only able to give like expert commentary, I feel like is maybe a type of this, but really what they seem to like these days are like real people, examples of real people who are impacted by certain stories. And sometimes that falls on the journalist, of course, to find those. But I know that it is something that PR people are trying to kind of figure out how to best work into the workflows. Is that something that you think is even doable internationally? How would you go about do it? Do you do it? How, if not, how would you go about recommend people going about doing that?
I would say the best people to comment that will be the people from the UK team who has been doing it for a long while. I would say, in short, I've not done it in any European pitches. Potentially because it's hard. Because if you're not on the ground, I think it's hard to find actual people that can help you with, like, even in a really hyper local angle. I don't know, if I'm not there, I wouldn't feel comfortable using any people's case studies unless it's like someone famous. Um, but I would say making sure, from my perspective, what I have done, if it's not really quite case study, but it's about helping with more local expertise, helping my story is, let's say I had a car related release and it had European data. I tried to find experts in the region I'm outreaching, citywide, for example. And the car release was all about congestion. It's all about how much time we waste behind the wheel. I found the head of traffic, the head of however you call it, there's different names in different countries for different regions. And I always emailed them first. I outreached to them to give a comment to me on the data, because the data is there. So I did the job for the journalists. So I did make it really local for them with someone from their own region, and I gave them data that they didn't have. So this is something that, yes, is the notion of having a case study, but I wouldn't use, how we have those Facebook chats in the UK that you can find case study for X, and I think it's quite a commercial thing right now. Trying to find a person who did X, like, or who went to a lookalike contest for Harry Styles. This is something that it's more UK specific. I wouldn't do that if I'm not on the ground.
Yeah,
What about you?
it needs to progress, I think, in Europe, because people have an appetite for it. Journalists do want to have sort of more case studies. And I think that's where video plays a role, because, we've talked about how they are very critical about fact checking and stuff like that. If you just send quotes in Europe, you could have written them with an AI.
Mm.
So there needs to be that, where is it coming from? Is that person a real person, to make sure it is relatable to their readers? So yeah, I think that's where video and sort of moving with an approach that's PR plus social works well, because you've got living proof, and then it's very shareable of your experts, and that they are who they are and they're relevant to your audience.
Yeah. Fantastic advice. If it doesn't look like anybody else has any questions, so I think we should end it there. Wait, one more. Actually, how to choose the best story to pitch. Again, I know we're a little over time. If people need to hop off, I'm going to share this. But this is a little more general. right? Like how to choose the best story to pitch. If I can get just like quick hit, thoughts on this, I feel like this is maybe going to be a universal thing for sure. You covered it a little bit in the talk, so we don't need to go too deep in it. But Chloe, do you have any quick hits?
Yeah, I think instant gut feeling for the yes. You need to earn attention quickly, and the way you do that effectively and quickly is through a really strong data set. So if you're going to start anywhere, don't just push out a storytelling narrative. Don't sit on the fence if you're doing expert commentaries. I would just 100% start with a really strong data-led campaign, either through you going out and collecting it yourself and making an index, or using your client's internal data. I think that would be my top tip.
Eirini, what do you got?
Yeah, best story. I don't know. Gut feeling is good because if you've done everything right, if you've done your research and everything, and you have the perfect pitch, I would say go positive first. That's a good rule of thumb.
Yeah, I'd say
Love it. What
if
about
it
you, Mark?
relates to you, it will relate
Mm,
to what you target. If you've got that market knowledge, and I always start my PRs with the hook. Why is
mm,
this relevant now, or why is it? It doesn't have to be it's been talked about it this week, but why is it an issue, or why is it relevant
mm.
now? And that is just what makes your story good.
Yeah, love it. All right. Well, special thanks to the Connective 3 team, Chloe, Mark, and Eirini. Thank you so much for your time putting this deck together and, giving your expertise here in this very important, I think, topic. I've seen way too many times people just kind of coming at this the same way that you kind of laid it out in the beginning, where it's like cut and paste, the same pitch and maybe run it through a translator, but it's a lot more in depth and takes a lot more than that. So, if you have questions about this stuff, I definitely recommend reaching out to the Connective 3 team, or comment on any of the stuff that I'm going to put out here. I can put you in touch with them directly, or email me or DM me. If people are interested in checking out BuzzStream, if you're not a user, or ListIQ, reach out to me. I can get you set up with a free account, some credits, and whatnot. So thank you all so much for joining. This will all be emailed to you in a nice, pretty package, probably by Monday, if I can get my act together. And I just a shout out for our next webinar is on May 13th, and we'll be covering all about AI citations, and kind of coming off of this big study that we did, looking at millions and millions of citations and what it means, and the different prompts that you know create these citations, where they're coming from. And we're going to be talking to the Citation Labs and Zofu team, who helped me gather the data. So that's May 13th. Look out for that in LinkedIn and newsletter and everything, wherever you get our information. Thanks again, team. Thank you all for watching, and good luck out there.
Thank
Thanks.
you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Bye.
Bye.